The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
You know, it's really important. We talk to our potential customers quite often and say, you really need to explore local first, and, you know, even maybe somewhat regional. It doesn't have to be just in Rockford, but you want to make sure you're talking to a company that's vertically integrated in a lot of cases, or that has the people in place. So example for Greenlink, you talk about the wraparound service, because solar is complex, and making sure that expectations are set correctly and that communication is open and flowing. These projects aren't something that happens in a couple days, or our use case, not even a couple weeks. It's a long-term project, and there's lots of moving parts, and just making sure that everybody knows where we're at. And if there are questions or concerns, that you can get to the right person to ask those questions and get those status updates on a project.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Welcome to the Clean Power Hour Live. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today we bring you a special live webinar, Let the Sunshine In, How Churches and Colleges Can Save with Solar, featuring Austin Carr, founder and president of Greenlink Energy Solutions, and Jim Keeling, a business attorney and partner at Hinshaw Law, both based in Rockford, Illinois. Today we're discussing the opportunities and challenges of behind-the-meter PV for churches and universities in Northern Illinois. Austin and Jim will be sharing their insights from recent successful solar installations at our Savior Lutheran Church and Rockford University, including navigating incentives, financing options, and stakeholder engagement. Please check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify, and check out our YouTube channel. All of our content is available on YouTube as well. This event is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link to the final recording. Please put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered during the course of the discussion or at the end. And please connect with me on LinkedIn. I love hearing from my listeners. I'm very easy to find. I'd like to introduce our speakers, and they will make a few introductory remarks about their experiences with solar, and then we'll work through a series of points about their experience with solar for facility owners. Austin Carr is the founder and president of Greenlink Energy Solutions, and a wonderful client of mine for the last 6 months, I must say. He is a distinguished leader with a remarkable journey shaped by his military service and unwavering commitment to energy efficiency and sustainability. Since founding Greenlink in 2011, Austin has steered the company to remarkable growth, expanding its services to include solar and HVAC divisions, and leading a team of nearly 60 professionals. Jim Keeling's business law practice focuses on organizational and transactional matters, including mergers, acquisitions, and real estate. He advises clients in estate and finance planning, real estate development, and guides closely held and family businesses on ownership relations and succession planning. Jim was previously Hinshaw's National Commercial Transactions Practice Group leader and serves as a partner in charge of the firm's Rockford office, and he also chaired the board of Hinshaw Consulting. With that, I welcome Austin and Jim. And Austin, why don't you kick us off with a few introductory remarks?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for putting this together today. We're excited to chat. And Jim, thank you for being here as well. Excited to have the three of us here to talk shop and share a little bit about the experiences that we've gone through recently with a couple of our most recent projects with our Savior's Lutheran and Rockford University, which we'll get into further. But first off, as we go through this today, we really want to give accolades to a lot of the Greenlink team members. We started our solar division back in 2018. Greenlink was established back in 2011 as a building science company, and we focus a lot on the envelope and the weatherization pieces of energy efficiency. And again, in 2018, 2019, when we started our solar division, we really started to round out our services into what we now call as a 360 approach, where we focus on the building envelope, we focus on the mechanical piece with our HVAC division, which we started in 2023, and then the renewable piece, where we kind of tie that whole system in together. And again, we've got an amazing team from people like AJ is our in-house counsel and policy analyst. She was a key driver in bringing some of these really exciting incentives to the table as we work through our Savior's Lutheran, which again, we'll get into some of the detail and the value that she helped bring together on that, along with Jared and the entire sales team, really digging in to make sure that we're getting the right data for our customers, that we're accurate with our projections and our proposals. And then obviously our production team, which is phenomenal, second to none. We believe they're one of the best in the region at what they do. And so, just really an exciting time, and we're honored to be here.
Thank you, Austin. And Jim Keeling.
Well, thank you, Tim, as well. And Austin, it is a great privilege to be here and have an opportunity to share some of our stories and experiences. As Tim had said, my career has been working with closely held family-owned businesses. Sort of the sweet spot would be the privately owned lower middle market type companies. And through those companies in the last few years, I have had the opportunity to review power purchase agreements or solar purchase agreements that they've had as solar is really spreading so quickly into our community. I'm also very active in the community, a number of different positions. And as it relates to what we're going to talk about today, I'm a trustee of Rockford University, and I'm on the finance cabinet of Our Savior's Lutheran. But I'm real interested in this initiative in Rockford called Sustain Rockford, which is a community-wide sustainability plan for our community. And from that organization, I got introduced to Greenlink, who I had not worked with on the business clients. But when things opened up for not-for-profits, basically with the Inflation Reduction Act in August of 2022, I got real interested in how we could start to take advantage of the policies that have been established by our state and by our national government to expand the access to solar. And so I've had a lot of fun over the last couple of years as a community member, volunteer, and that's my role with both Rockford University and Our Saviors. It's not for my law practice, but it's in my volunteer work within our community.
For any of our listeners, either on this live event or listening to the recording, understand that we have extremely generous incentives in the state of Illinois for behind-the-meter solar. The main program is called Illinois Shines, and then the adjacent program is called Solar for All. Solar for All is the low and moderate income program. And what these programs do is they funnel resources from everyday consumers and business owners into solar projects. And literally, we all, if you're in Ameren, ComEd, or Mid-American territory in Illinois, these are the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, you have a small fee. It's about 2% of your bill that you're paying on a monthly basis. And that goes into a central pot, which is then allocated by the utilities to solar projects. And what this does is it shortens the payback period for facility owners that want to buy a solar project or host a third-party owned solar project. And so it makes solar affordable. It jumpstarts the market. In the United States, solar started on the coasts: California, Hawaii, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and then has worked its way here to the center of the country, where energy historically is very cheap. It still is, relatively speaking, right? We pay very low rates per kWh for grid electricity. But now solar is competitive with grid electricity, and so you can install a solar array and reduce your power bill by 50 to 75%. You will never reduce your power bill by 100% unless you go off-grid with a very large battery, and that is a heavy lift. But anyway, that is the basic premise for facility owners, that you can reduce your power bill, all the while using green electrons, right? We're collecting photons from the sun with solar photovoltaics, so the fuel is free. Once you install the technology, you get electricity from sunlight. It sounds too good to be true, but it's not. It's basic physics. And so anyway, check out Illinois Shines if you're curious about solar in Illinois, or Solar for All if you're in a low to moderate income community. So Austin and Jim, from your perspective, at a high level, why are churches and universities considering going solar?
Yeah. Well, Jim, I'll let you speak on that, since you're on the boards and you're one of the ones really driving that, and I can speak to it from our side, but I'll let you take the first run at that.
Yes. Well, it's a double bottom line is the reason. First of all, it's the right thing to do in terms of protecting our environment. In the church world, we speak about how we were given as stewards the garden, and we haven't always done the greatest job with that garden, have we? And so one way to start to take better care of the resources that we're entrusted with is to use the one that's free for us all, and that's the power of the sun. So from an environmental perspective, it has really resonated with the members of Our Saviors, where we've done this, and the other churches that I've been speaking with that have heard about Our Saviors and heard about Greenlink work with Our Saviors, wanting to emulate it. It has built a very strong community within our church, to the point that several of the members, when we initiated our solar, we had what we call a forum, which is like a workshop, information session for the members of the congregation. And immediately, even before we were able to get our project done, they had solar panels on their homes, and through Greenlink. So the environment is the one big driver, and the second bottom line is the economics of it, with the various incentives and the saving on the electric bill. That basically, if you didn't have any incentives, it would be equivalent to taking an endowment and paying 4 or 5% on the endowment, in the savings. That if you had paid for the whole system without getting any of the various incentives, which is not a terrible return in its own right. It's not enough to really get the job done for endowment investing, but it's a lot of protection against future increases in electric bills that come, and the economics with the incentives is really phenomenal, and can speak to how quick it all pays back.
And I would add, Jim, that it really is triple bottom line, right? When we go solar, we're also reducing the amount of electricity we're consuming from historical sources of fossil fuel energy, and that there is a cost directly to human health, but also to the environment and to future generations. So Good for our pocketbook, good for the environment, and good for human health. Thank you.
It's interesting too when we talk about the environmental impacts. As I was first, thinking about this concept of Greenlink back in 2011, one of my big drivers. I'm a big hunter and fisherman, and I love being outdoors. And as I was getting out of the military, transition back into civilian life, some of the solar technology was just starting to be deployed and released on some of the equipment that we would use. And so I knew that the energy space was a good area to be in. It has a high impact for the reasons that you just spoke about, Jim. And again, as being an avid outdoorsman, I thought, wow, this is a great way to make a big impact and protects the beautiful nature that God has given us. And just a lot of upside there outside of the financial piece, which again in Illinois is just an incredible opportunity. When we get into it later and I look at the net costs on Our Savior's Lutheran as an example, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity and really a blessing even to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, for the churches and nonprofits.
I wonder if we could go a little deeper into the church scenario, because, the savings are very significant. Now, it depends on how you finance a project. If you buy the project, if you have the resources to buy the solar facility, your savings are going to be much more significant than if you do third-party financing, but both are options. And by third-party financing, I mean there's a third party, a solar asset owner who owns the asset and then sells the power from the facility via what's called a power purchase agreement at a discount over what you're paying for grid power. And typically you would achieve a 10 to 20% discount over grid power. With, as I mentioned, with when you own the facility, you could reduce your power bill by 50 to 75%. But Jim, what was that conversation like in the run up to, pulling the trigger and really making the decision? And what were some of the pros and cons, I guess, that the decision makers were considering?
For the church, we formed a joint committee, ad hoc committee of some people involved in finance, some people that are on our creation care, which is our environmental group, and our facilities people. And we learned immediately that we had one good roof that would support solar without any additional work being done on it. And so we focused our first phase of our project onto that. That's a gymnasium type building, and it now hosts enough panels to produce about half of the electrical power for the church, roughly. And that was a $300,000 project at its gross cost. And that project is internally financed with the church funds. And we looked at whether to borrow, but we always had in mind owning our system as opposed to dealing with a third party. Because of the Illinois Shines program, the Commonwealth Edison, who's our provider up in our part of the state, rebate, and the federal tax credits, actually our net cost of our system, of our phase one of our system, is about $12,000. We were fortunate enough to not only get the 30% investment tax credit, but also applied for, with the help of AJ Young, who Austin talked about, the United States Department of Energy and the IRS have administered a low-income area program that our church qualified to apply for. It's more or less a lottery for an additional 10% federal tax credit. Now, you may be wondering how are not-for-profits, getting tax credits? They don't pay taxes. How do they get the benefit from the tax credits? And the answer to that is that, and this is the critical point, that to create almost parity between not-for-profits and for-profit businesses and individuals, it's a refundable credit that is after a system is completed, there's a tax filing, and then a check comes back from the Internal Revenue Service. In our case, that'll be 40% of that $300,000, which is about $120,000. That will come probably next summer, in the summer of 2025. So there's the first thing is, there's a gross cost and there's a net cost, but you got to bridge between the two, because you don't just pay the net cost and have somebody else wait to get the incentive payments. Like happens when you get a rebate on a car or something, that they just take it out of the price. Doesn't work that way. This investment tax credit you have to carry for a year or so. It's going to go on our 2024 tax return, as will our phase 2 that we're working our way up to. So we're expecting to file that in early 2025 and then actually get the checks in mid 2025. Now, our church had, enough money in its various funds to be able to internally finance without going to the bank, and it's chosen to do that. The other pieces, you had mentioned the Illinois Shines program, and they're based on the production of the system. The tax credit is based on the cost of the system. The Illinois Shines program is based on the productivity of the system, and there is an application to get enrolled into that program that is provided in the wraparound services that Greenlink has provided for us, and got us enrolled in that. And then there is a substantial amount that comes back from that program over a 7-year period, and actually a small amount after 15 years that drives down this cost. When you go from $300,000 to $12,000, that's $288,000 that's coming back for the system. So they're really only, if you have the cash, the really only the cost is that $12,000, or if you didn't get the bonus, it would be $40,000, and then the cost of the carry between the money coming back. So it makes an incredible, return on investment when you're saving $13,000 to $15,000 in electric bill, starting when the system goes live.
Yeah. So just to recap, and then I want to get Austin's perspectives from the installer perspective on some of this stuff. There's the way a solar array pays back for the host is energy to grid, right? The solar is producing electricity, so it lowers your power bill. You get tax credits. In this case, Jim is referring to something called direct pay for nonprofits, and the ITC is very generous, 30%, plus they got an adder for low income, so they got a 40% tax credit. And then there are cash incentives, like renewable energy credits. In Illinois, we have a very robust renewable energy credit market. 1 megawatt hour of electricity is 1 REC. And that is equivalent to something like 30 to 40% of the value of the system coming back to the host in a check. It's paid out over 7 years. So it's not a one lump sum, but it's significant checks over time. And the net result is that you have an outlay at the front, okay, but you're getting significant portions of this $300,000 back, and then you're cash positive within 5 years. So Austin, Jim mentioned things like roof condition, and I'm curious from the installers and the wraparound services that Greenlink offers. Walk us through, if you would, Austin, what are some of the key steps in developing a commercial solar project?
Sure. Yeah. So as we start off in a project and kind of do what we call a qualification conversation to understand really the needs of the customer, something about solar is it's not just a cookie cutter, one size fits all, and say, hey, I'm interested in solar. Okay, great. This is what you're going to get. It doesn't work that way. It's very custom. We want to make sure that we're providing the exact service and catering towards the needs and goals of that customer. Different customers and entities might have different objectives when going solar, outside of, a couple of the big things that we spoke about already. And so once we have a really good understanding of what that customer wants to do, when it's possible, we always like to look at installing on the roof if we have a suitable roof structure. So the condition of that roof, like Jim talked about, we broke our Savior's Lutheran into a couple different phases for that project. But phase one, we attacked, the roof that had good condition and good shape so that we could move forward there. We're also going to be looking at the electrical infrastructure, looking at the switch gear and the main service coming into the building to understand what phasing it's in and how we're going to interconnect that system into the grid. One of the things that we use is Aurora as a design tool. And so we put in the customers, we're gathering all their utility bills, and we're putting this into the design software to say, if we design the system with X number of panels, what kind of offset is that going to give us? We'll typically look to get around 100% offset. In some cases, we're going to be a little less or a little more, again, depending on the customer's goals. But this design software is going to take into consideration, environmental impacts such as, snow, the snow in the wintertime. We know that we're going to have some days where that solar system is not producing power. And that's where the beauty of net metering comes into play. And net metering is essentially almost like a virtual savings account throughout the year, where on days when you're overproducing, potentially making more power than your building is using, it's going into the savings account. And on days where you have lower production, but you still have that draw on the consumption side, you're pulling back out of that account. And so we're walking through that with the customer through the design. We're talking to them about net metering and the incentives. And there was something too that I want to touch on that Jim had mentioned, talking, and you touched on it too, Tim, with the elective pay. That had not always been the case. So if you're a non-for-profit and maybe you looked at solar back in 2020 or 2021, that option didn't exist. And so as a non-for-profit, you were not going to get that great financial ROI like you could do today. They built that into the Inflation Reduction Act that passed in 22. And that really changed the game for non-for-profits to be able to maximize the benefit of going solar. And again, there's a number of adders, again, that are tied into that. There's domestic content, there's energy communities, there's low-income communities, and there's a number of different ways that we can look to try to maximize that value for the customer. And that's also part of what we're doing during that design process. We're not only looking at how the system is going to be potentially constructed, but we're looking to see what are the economics of this and how can we provide the most value for our customers by stacking these incentives and rebates that exist.
I think we should talk about Rockford University because this is a nice contrast to the church project. The Rockford University project is a much bigger project, more stakeholders, probably a more complex decision-making process, and Jim was integrally involved in that as well. And what I'm particularly interested in here, gentlemen, is the relationship ultimately between the host and the installer. One of your challenges as a facility owner is finding a credible, qualified installer who can provide, as Jim says, a wraparound service. It is so important, and there are so many nuances to securing incentives in a timely manner that you really have to find the right partner on a solar project. So, Jim, why don't you paint a picture for us? How did that project get started, and what ultimately led Rockford University to working with Greenlink on that project?
Yes. So last year, at about this time last year, I was at one of the trustee meetings, and the topic, the discussion started talking about solar, a little bit of update about the Inflation Reduction Act, and whether we could start to explore. And so just like at the church, a task force was put together of trustees along with key administrative staff, the CFO of the university, and the vice president of operations and facilities. And we started studying, how big our need is. Now, Rockford University is about 900 full-time students, about 1,200 or so full-time equivalent students, has about 400 residential students, have a whole number of buildings, and have a lot of roofs that need work. And we wanted to find a field first, even though, Austin had said that, the systems he looks for the buildings first. We tried to find a field. We found a field. We were discouraged by Greenlink, who was doing some of the exploration with us. By now, I had a nice, trusting working relationship with Austin and his team from Our Saviors, and they knew that they were, might end up getting into a bidding situation, on this project. So we together explored which roofs worked, what the power situation was for the university. The university's buildings were built essentially in the 60s. And we have 8 smaller dormitories and a gymnasium building that were identified as having the structural integrity to host solar. And we were trying to get about 10% of our usage. The power usage of a university is shockingly high. We saw an opportunity for the same economics that we were talking about related to Our Saviors on a larger scale, because it's about 4 times the size of the project of the 2 phases of Our Saviors. And so by the fall, we were ready to move ahead to the point to apply for the same adder of investment tax credit that we had. And we have a fiscal year of June 30th. So in the fall, we did get other bids and focused in with Greenlink through the process. It made me very happy because I felt that we had the relationship for that wraparound service that we needed. I didn't know the others as well. There are other, companies that do well in our community, but the others that were on the committee felt also that Greenlink was the right partner for the university. So we applied and have not gotten the extra 10% investment tax credit. In this case, we have third-party financing that we're finalizing. This system is in the process of being installed, as we speak. Austin can speak to its status in terms of completion as he's working this job real hard for a window. Universities have a June 30th fiscal year, so we are hoping to be active by June 30th and here we are on May 1st, but active and finished to be able to apply for the tax credits in our fiscal year 2024, June 30, 2024 tax return. I hope it's another, first phase of a project that goes on and maybe go back to the field for another piece of it. But as roofs are replaced on our buildings, try to phase in and do a lot more.
As Jim pointed out, one of the first considerations for any facility owner is, can we do roof-based solar, which is wonderful, or can we do ground-mounted? And the challenge with roof-mounted is roof condition, first and foremost. And, you don't want to solarize a roof that's more than 10 years old typically, and so that can quickly become a challenge. But in this case, they opted for a combination. Austin, why don't you share some remarks about your experience working on the Rockford University project?
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts on this actually. So, one of the things I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit is, potential entities looking to explore going solar. Jim talked about we had this existing relationship, and so we were able to segue and start to have that conversation with Rockford University. But it's really important we talk to our potential customers quite often and say, you really need to explore local first, and even maybe somewhat regional. It doesn't have to be just in Rockford, but you want to make sure you're talking to a company that's vertically integrated in a lot of cases, or that has the people in place. So example for Greenlink, you talk about the wraparound service. I've personally been in contact with the president of RU throughout the project and the board, sending updates constantly because solar is complex, and making sure that expectations are set correctly and that communication is open and flowing. These projects aren't something that happens in a couple days, or our use case, not even a couple weeks. It's a long-term project, and there's lots of moving parts, and just making sure that everybody knows where we're at. And if there are questions or concerns, that you can get to the right person to ask those questions and get those status updates on a project. We've also got our production team that's in constant communications with the director of operations out at RU, and they're talking daily saying, hey, here's what we're doing next. Here's what we did yesterday. And just making sure that everything is fluid and efficient in that sense. We see and hear, and they talk about the locality, because in the solar industry, there have been, some trials and tribulations with this emerging, growing industry, where some companies are popping up and they're not planning to stay around. They're newer, they didn't make it, whatever the cases may be. So looking at the history of a company and the locality, I think, is really important. Maybe even understanding a little bit of the organizational structure of a company that you're exploring to work with as well. For example, our production team, we've got our customer success folks and our project managers, again, that are engaged and really care about the success of these projects. It's not just a number for us or for our team members. We want to make sure that our projects are successful. And Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that, through the years of service that we've had within the community here in Rockford, when you guys began to speak to, all the members at Rockford University about this project, I think there were several folks that we have actually worked on their homes or maybe other businesses before, and they had that 5-star experience and felt that, and knew from past experience that we were a good contractor and a good group to work with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was pretty neat to see it all come full circle like that.
Right. In a community of our size, there's a high probability that will occur, that people will know and have had prior experience and so forth, which all really helps to build stronger relationships.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 3-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes 3-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more. So what was it like, and this is for both of you, this is a question from Jared, what, in terms of the stakeholders, were you able to achieve like a complete consensus, or what were the challenges that you had to overcome along the way in basically making the decision to do the project and do it at a certain time?
It was interesting, in both situations, we would collect the questions and do kind of an internal frequently asked questions that people had, and we would furnish those to Tom Anderson, who works for Austin, and he would also answer the questions. And so when we got beyond the church council and we're going to have the forum, and actually at the church council, a couple of the members of the council are pretty sophisticated business people. I was able to furnish them the material that we'd already done, and they said, well, they answered all my questions. One of them, we weren't doing any storage. One of them said, I'm so glad we're not doing storage. I suspect there may come a time when we need to review that. If this situation with peak demand charges continues on as we're seeing it as happened in California. Anyway, it was unanimous vote. It was we had to have a congregation vote because of the size of the expenditure under our Constitution. And the the second project will be up for that congregation vote here in the next month, and I suspect it'll be unanimous as well. There's been no pushback at all. Everyone is very proud that we've done this. At the university, it's largely the same. The first time it was introduced to the university community was at the they have a meeting, a kickoff meeting in August, at which time the president asked that I speak and share that we were exploring, that we hadn't made any decisions at that point. The support was very strong, and it, for a university to respond on the environmental side was really strong. On the fiscal side, there's always challenges related to competing investments for a university. Why are we doing this when we need to have a better science lab or whatever it might be? There's been hardly any of that, but we've been very sensitive to that, to show and to share how this project pays for itself and actually facilitates other investments by the university in different programs or different facilities. So no problems, on those fronts, with enough communication and sharing of information and the like, to the point that people shift and want to do it for their homes.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of resources. These are significant purchases for any organization, for-profit or non-profit. Investing in a solar facility is a major upgrade to your facility. And like you guys have said, it does pay back. But the challenge can be that there's competing interests for those dollars. You could do some other facility upgrade. You could do R&D. You could do some hiring or other type of expansion of the business. And so getting through those competing interests is very important.
Yeah, and I just want to add on a little bit that while we were doing this, we have stress tested our borrowing capacity, and the answer that came back from our financial institution and independently from another financial institution in our community is that they will not count this financing against our borrowing capacity. That they even would finance without collateral, 7-year fully amortizing financing, because they view the incentives that are coming in to be a third-party funding,
Sure.
And that plus the energy savings. So it is something that businesses need to know, as well as not-for-profits. That would be at conventional rates, and of course the not-for-profit in this case, or the business, has to have its own sustainability for it to work. They've got to be able to know they're going to be there and in business for 10 years. But still, it would not borrow again, not cost. Count against the overall borrowing capacity of the university or the church.
Yeah, I want to get into some of the nuances of financing solar projects. And before we do that, Austin, did you want to say anything else about stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, I think maybe stakeholder engagement, one of the things that had came to my mind are, some of the challenges and uniqueness with Rockford University that I had a couple notes to share. And that's, when you look at a large, commercial industrial scale solar project, either side of the meter, those projects typically take many months to years, even sometimes, to get through that what we call pre-production, the development phase, in order to move into construction. And one of the unique things, we kind of had a goal with Rockford University, and we were kind of locked in there on a couple different fronts. We have the end of their fiscal year in June where they want to be able to claim for those tax credits, which makes a lot of sense to us. But then we also had the SREC block that was going to be closing at the end of May. And so we wanted to race to get that interconnection approval in order to then move in to get the SREC contract signed and secure those higher value SRECs. And so that took a lot of collaboration between both groups to move that forward at a speed which I've never seen. I didn't even know for sure if it was possible to move that quickly, but we were very fortunate and had some favor throughout that process in order to, again, secure the higher SRECs and certainly feel very confident that we'll hit the deadline of the install date before the end of the fiscal year for the university.
We've got about 15 minutes left. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will answer those live. I want to talk about financing. You know, you mentioned, Jim, this issue of credit worthiness, basically, right, of the institution. And there's many ways to finance a solar project. I'm going to give you the very high level, and then we could maybe delve into some of the nuances of what these two institutions have done. But you can do a cash purchase, right, where you just buy the equipment. You can do a loan, okay? If you don't have the cash up front, you can get a commercial loan. This is well established in the commercial banking world. So most regional or larger banks are very familiar with commercial solar. And then you can do a operating lease. There are a handful of vendors, and Greenlink and other installers can point you to those vendors for operating leases, which is very similar to a vehicle lease. And then there's a power purchase agreement where you're just buying the energy from the system, and a third party is owning the asset. Now, in both of these cases that we're talking about here today, they did cash purchase, as far as I know, or some type of host owning the array. But what comments do you two have about financing a solar project, both specific to these cases we're talking about, but in general?
Yeah, like Jim mentioned earlier, one of the big things we're finding is where a lot of banks and financing mechanisms are looking at this, and they're not hitting on the debt to income side for the future ability to borrow and raise capital or finance capital for different improvements. We have manufacturers that say, well, we're looking at either going solar or we want this new piece of equipment. And as we continue to grow into this, and what we're finding is that that's not the case. You don't necessarily have to make that decision between either or. You can do both. You have to time it and work with the lender appropriately, of course. And another unique thing too that we see with the amount of the incentives that we have, and depending on individual project specifics, but we've seen many cases where the incentives will actually fund or make the payments on that bridge loan or that loan as you're recouping to get to your net cost on that system, where a customer will never necessarily need to pull money out of their pocket to make those payments. If the timing all lines up, that is a possibility, which is really incredible. I mean, I don't know what other things you can purchase in life where the incentives are going to pay that loan back for you. You get to your net of little to no cost, and then you have all the upside of the positive cash flow and the lower operating expenses beyond that point. We always look to try to help a customer look at a purchase, even if it's financed, as a starting point. The ROI is going to be the highest by far. But then you can look at power purchase agreements. Maybe there's particular goals that an organization has where they don't want to borrow the money at all. They want it off the balance sheet. They can look at these power purchase agreements and still capture some of the value and kind of hedge against future price increases for the utilities as well, which is unique. So they can almost fix their operating costs in a sense. Those are some of the big things that we look at. But again, where it's possible, a purchase is going to be the highest ROI for a customer.
My experience has been similar with the business clients that got into the leasing arrangement, the financing cost of that. I mean, these could be fair market value or a dollar buyout after a period of time. It's really just a loan in a different wrapper, and they tend to be fairly high interest rates compared with bank rates. And we are exploring trying to get a a Advantage Illinois program loan for related to the Rockford University, which is a program that the Department of Community and Economic Opportunity has to work with a bank to drive down the interest rate by blending an interest rate together. And we're waiting, for news on that as we're talking today.
And that interest rate, Jim, that's lowered significantly when you look at that blended rate. Do you recall what that is versus the market rate?
Yeah, for us, our market rate would be 7 to 7.5%, and this is 4.75%, or let's say 4.7 to 5%. Again, with a 7-year, amortization to it. So it's really significant. At our church, the funds that we used, until 2 years ago, we didn't do any cash management of our cash because the short-term interest rates that we could get on our cash were virtually zero, like 0.01% or something. With the higher Fed rate, we are making a little over 5% on our cash that we have. We've taken all of our funds and kind of bundled them together. So that's essentially our cost of, by not making the 5%, that's the cost of our internal financing to do the project. And I talked about that being a $300,000 project. The projections with a 4% annual increase in electric bills and a modest, I think it's 0.45% degradation of the system as it gets less efficient over the years as the equipment ages. There's $730,000 of electric bill savings off of this $300,000, project. Not present value of that money, but that's how we've managed our electric costs for the future. The same thing will repeat in our phase 2, where we'll be up to 80% of our electric bill having been saved when we do this second phase. Our second phase, incidentally, we've done a roof that we've just finished to host the second phase of the solar system and solar panel system. And we get some tax credit also related to the roof work, although it's fairly modest because it's the incremental cost of the new roof as to what it costs to be able to safely and structurally host the solar as compared to a flat roof in this case that might have been replaced if we weren't ever considering solar. But that part of our cost will be qualify for the investment tax credit as well.
You had a comment, Austin?
Tim. Yeah, something we haven't talked much about yet either, which is something to be considered for all non-for-profits, is Illinois Solar for All. We're talking about Illinois Shines, which is, like we said, a little bit of a different pathway. But in cases where a customer candidate qualifies, Illinois Solar for All is another opportunity where there's higher SRECs, there's O&M and some other features that are built into those projects, and a structure for that in a lot of cases can lead to where there's no loans being taken at all on the customer side in order to get this, $200,000-$400,000 system installed. There's two primary drivers for that. One of them is through a lease, which is actually, it's a 6-year lease. And then on the 7th year, that system is donated back to the customer. And then we've also seen where a customer can get even a better ROI if they are interested and capable of doing a bridge loan while they wait for those SRECs to come back in. They can flat out own that system and have it paid for, in a year or two, and then have all the upside from there. So again, the Illinois Solar for All has those higher SRECs, and in some cases, again, where a customer qualifies highly based on geography, that's something that we would explore as well. So between Illinois Shines and Illinois Solar for All, it covers everybody in almost every case.
Yeah, I think this really this highlights the importance of having a very experienced installer who really understands the programs and can help you dial in the best incentives that that are accessible to you as an institution. In our last few minutes together, there is one question here that I really want to get to, which is the impact of storage. We have a question from Rich about adding a battery. How does and we're going to talk in very broad strokes here, but the question is, does adding a battery help an organization leverage incentives and create greater ROI? And I know that that Greenlink is just really getting into the commercial storage space, but Austin, can you make a few high-level comments about why commercial customers should consider adding storage to their solar project?
Sure. Yeah, I can touch on a high level, and then Tim, if you wanted to add on to that, I know you've got a lot of depth of knowledge in the C&I space with storage. But essentially, you got a couple of major impacts. You got the first off, which comes to everybody's mind right out of the gate, is the resiliency, having that backup power. So a common misconception in the storage, solar world is if you don't have a battery and the grid goes down, your solar system is going to shut down. It's going to quit producing power until the grid is restored, and the system is sensing that grid power, and it's shutting itself off. Once it senses that power is restored, it'll turn back on and begin to do its operations as normal. But the really exciting thing is with battery storage in the C&I space, you can really use that tool to generate positive cash flow. You're hitting against demand charges in a way that you would not otherwise be able to do with just having a solar system. And these batteries can be programmed to monitor what the utility companies are charging, monitoring their grid versus what the storage is on that battery, and look at almost a sense of arbitraging the energy that's stored in that battery to generate another stream of revenue for those customers.
Well said. Yeah, a battery can give you resiliency. That is a super valuable depending on your circumstances. If you have brownouts or blackouts, and then there's a stack of value that it can provide. You can attack what are called capacity charges or demand charges. And then you can provide grid services like frequency regulation. So finding an installer who has robust partners, in this case like Intelligent Generation, who can really explain this complex value stack of storage. Storage is deep water, but we do have a very generous incentive in the state of Illinois, $250 per kWh for batteries. And so batteries are going to be cash positive in many cases in just a couple of years, and overall reduce the simple payback period of a solar and storage project compared to just solar alone. So the answer to your question is yes, you should definitely be considering storage. The downside of storage projects is that it increases the capital expenditure or the CapEx significantly. It might double the CapEx. And so if resources are tight, then that may not be a consideration for you. It also makes the project more complicated. But as we've seen on numerous commercial industrial projects with Greenlink recently, it is a tremendous value add. I want to be respectful of our audience, and we are going to wrap up. Do either of you have any concluding remarks?
Sure. As everybody may have learned throughout the day, if you're not deep into the solar industry and you hear this conversation and a lot of the acronyms and policies and programs that we're talking about, that's where, like Tim said, it makes sense to have a good partner and a good installer, and between Greenlink with our internal team, but equally important is our external team, folks like Tim and Intelligent Generations and all the different groups that we work with allow us to really maximize the value that we can bring to a customer in their project.
Jim Keeling.
I'd just like to thank you for including me in this webinar, Tim. It's fun to talk about and reflect on the projects and the impact that they're having, in our such positive impact they're having in our community.
I want to thank our speakers, Austin Carr, the president of Greenlink Energy Solutions, and Jim Keeling, partner at Hinshaw Law, for being with us today. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Go to the events tab. You'll see we have several upcoming events. And in the pre-show, Jim was talking about an event there in Rockford. There is an event sponsored by Sustain Rockford in July. Jim, could you give us a quick preview of what that event is going to be?
It is a community workshop related to solar in our community. I think it's July 17th. I'm not 100% sure of that, but if anyone listening wants that information, they can just reach out to you, Tim, and I'll be sure that you have all the information.
Yep, we'll put that link to that event in the show notes and in the email that goes out to registrants. Again, thank you all for being here. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care, everyone. Hey, listeners. This is Tim. I want to give a shout out to all of you. I do this for you twice a week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate you and what you're all about. You are part and parcel of the energy transition, whether you're an energy professional today or an aspiring energy professional. So thank you. I want to let you know that the Clean Power Hour has launched a listener survey, and it would mean so much to me if you would go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on the About Us link right there on the main navigation. That takes you to the About page, and you'll see a big graphic, Listener Survey. Just click on that graphic, and it takes just a couple of minutes. If you fill out the survey, I will send you a lovely baseball cap with our logo on it. The other thing I want our listeners to know is that this podcast is made possible by corporate sponsors. We have Chin Power Systems, the leading three-phase string inverter manufacturer in North America. So check out CPS America. But we are very actively looking for additional support to make this show work. And you see here our media kit with all the sponsor benefits and statistics about the show. You know, we're dropping 2 episodes a week. We have now over 320,000 downloads on YouTube, and we're getting about 45,000 downloads per month. So this is a great way to bring your brand to our listeners, and our listeners are decision makers in clean energy. This includes project executives, engineers, finance, project management, and many other professionals who are making decisions about and developing, designing, installing, and making possible clean energy projects. So check out cleanpowerhour.com, both our listener survey on the About Us and our media kit, and become a sponsor today. Thank you so much. Let's grow solar and storage. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chinpowersystems.com to find out more.